Hello, folks, and welcome to a Sirius Decisions webinar sponsored by Revigy. My name's Tim Brayman. I run sales and marketing for Revigy. And we've got the privilege today of having Jim Ninavaji, who's Service Director for the Sales Enablement Strategies at Sirius Decisions, leading us through a presentation that he's developed on effective practices in implementing your own account planning methodology. Now, Jim is a 25-year veteran of the sales and marketing wars. He actually founded the Sales Enablement Strategies practice there at Sirius Decisions about 3 years ago. And without getting into any further detail or Jim's love of monster trucks, we're going to go ahead and let Jim begin to start talking about the presentation. Okay, Jim, I'm turning it over to you, man.
Great. Hey, Tim, thanks very much for giving us this opportunity to present with Revigy. And thanks for that introduction. It's always good to be reminded how old I am, at 25-plus years.
Sorry about that, man.
So no worries. So if you look at, what we want you to walk away with today, we are here to talk about implementing an account planning methodology and how technology can help you do that. And one of the things we want you to walk away with is you don't have to over-engineer an account planning methodology in order for it to be effective. As a matter of fact, it's probably harder to get it simpler, but the simpler the account plan is, the greater the adoption will be for your reps. We also want you to walk away with what we see as the key elements that that a common account plan will have. And at the end of the day, it's not about account planning. It's about account execution. So we're going to really focus a lot of our attention on how do you ensure that that great plan that you put together actually is executed.
Okay. So Jim, begin with the end in mind here. So companies come to us at various points in their journey around account planning. So, I'm sure you got an opinion. So why don't you share with us, where do people start, right? And what does Sirius see about best practices related to that?
Sure. The best place to start is, and the biggest mistake we see with organizations is they start with themselves. What do we want to do? And really what we stress with our clients, Tim, is you always want to think about the buyer. And to help our clients do that, we've developed what we call the Sirius Decisions B2B Buying Cycle Framework. I'm just going to build it out here for everybody. And simply put, this is based on our work with hundreds of B2B sales organizations and understanding the clients that they're selling to. These are the typical steps that we see a B2B buyer making as they go through a complex buying decision. And we've broken it into three major phases. So it starts with the education phase, and that's where the buyer is saying, I know what we have today isn't optimal, but I'm not ready to make a change. And then something happens in that organization, either a change in leadership or some type of event occurs, or something external like regulatory issues, and the buyer has to make a change. And then the buyer moves into from education, where they're starting to explore options and to really figuring out, okay, so what does the solution look like that we need? And it's here that they're engaging with vendors. They're putting together RFPs and proposals, and they move into, they finalize their selection. Maybe they have it down to one or two vendors, and they say, okay, now we're going to present this to our CFO, and we're going to figure out whether or not, of all the priorities we have right now, if this is a decision we need to make today. And so the buyer moves into justifying the decision. This is where risk for buyers gets very real. And this is typically where you see the deals getting stalled as they relate to sales cycles, where all of a sudden I'll have a deal get all the way down to the end of my pipeline, and it just sits there. That's because the buyer is basically still deciding, is this the time to make this purchase? And then they move into making the selection. What's important in terms of understanding your buyer and looking at account planning, not from our lens, but from the lens of that buyer, is part of what we want to do with our account plan is to understand, so where are the typical buying centers that exist in my client organizations? We think about the various buying cycles that we might be a part of based on our solution set. Where do the buying centers reside? Who's involved? Who's typically playing a role in that decision process? From a user perspective, a technical perspective, a financial decision maker perspective. What are the typical catalysts? What are the things, if we look at that education phase, what are the things that move that buyer off of status quo and into actually making a decision? And then lastly, if we look at these various buying centers, where do we stand? How well entrenched are we with this particular account? How well do we know these buying centers? And are there buying centers and decisions that are happening that we're not a part of and we need to be a part of? So that's where we say to start is you want to look at that. You want to start by looking at that buyer. The other place we suggest that our clients start is really understanding the difference between account planning and opportunity planning, because sometimes we see our clients using them interchangeably, and they're very different. And the way to think about it is an account plan provides you with that macro strategy. Again, understanding where the buying centers are, understanding the current relationships. It gives us an opportunity to stand back and look holistically at the relationship of the account. Ideally, what's happening is through good account planning, it's driving opportunities. It's driving those distinct buying cycles and hopefully leading to, because this is the ultimate goal, leading to pipeline and leading to closed business.
Hey, Jim.
So that's another place. Yes, Tim.
Hey, can I ask you to back up one slide real quick?
Sure.
So looking at the buying cycle, and I'm a big fan of this, right? It seems to me that I hear an awful lot these days about the buyer does their education over the internet and through peers, and they don't actually engage the vendors until that third box, quite frequently, that exploring the possible solutions. So one of the things that I've always been a fan of and the philosophy of is that account planning should be focused not on just responding to the opportunities that come your way, but really to help the customer loosen the status quo, to actually create, challenge, or provoke new opportunities. Do you see that? Do you guys have some metrics or research around that?
Sure. Yeah, and there are a lot of numbers that are being floated out there right now in terms of the percentage of the buying cycle going through. Our opinion, our view on that is it's really difficult to say, okay, it's X percentage, because these are very complex decision processes dealing with lots of different buyers. But we go out and we do research with salespeople, we do research with buyers, and yeah, there is no question, especially on the sales side. If we ask salespeople, we did a study recently of over 350 seasoned salespeople. They had to have 11 plus years experience, and overwhelmingly they came back and said, my biggest challenge today, I come in much later in this decision process. And to your point, Tim, our research is showing that it's between stages 3 and 4 that the salesperson's been brought in. And again, that could be good news if I come in and the buyer is aligned to my solution already. They're kind of been pre-sold because our marketing group's done a great job. And my job there is to just move that deal forward and make sure that my competitors don't get into the deal or don't displace me. It's bad news, obviously, if when I come into the deal, it's clear that my competitor's solution is the preferred one, and therefore I need to figure out how to reframe. But to your point, Tim, the challenge is, and it's interesting, our data also show that a lot of salespeople today are saying, I'm giving up, I'm not even going to try to get in to loosening the status quo. And we would say that would be a big mistake, and it'll be very difficult for any salesperson to make their number if they're just reacting to business. So with account planning, we can look to identify what are those areas where there is that loosening of status quo, where the buyer is feeling some pain but not enough pain to make a commitment to change. And then through our efforts from a marketing and sales perspective, we can then begin to move that buyer into committing to change.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim.
Sure. Feel free to interrupt me anytime.
Okay, thanks.
So we looked the other, so we've talked a little bit with where to begin. Number one, start with that buyer. Number two, make sure you're clear in terms of I'm doing account planning and not opportunity planning. And then we want to look at starting with the end in mind. So you want to be clear as to why you're doing the account planning in the first place. Is it because you want to, is it a retention strategy? Hey, we're looking to retain and hold. Is it a growth strategy where we're looking to grow our business? If we're, are we looking to expand? Are we looking to, go into new industries or new markets? Or are we looking to do account planning because we want to get more vertically focused? And we see this, a lot of times we see this with companies that are selling a lot to government, where they'll get that vertical focus and they start doing account planning to manage those larger accounts in that vertical. And then the other places where we see our clients in terms of as they begin to get into the account planning process, some of the mistakes that they make, and these are obviously things that you want to avoid, but you want to make sure you've got a strong account structure, that it's clear as to what the account manager's role is, and sales should be running that account, it should be running the account planning process, and they need to own that account planning process. But that doesn't mean that they're not pulling in resources from anybody who's working on that account, from marketing to the folks in service and implementation. Sales engineers need to be part of the account planning process. But you need structure in terms of who's responsible for what. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but selection is key. You want to make sure, because account planning takes a lot of resources and time, you want to make sure you're betting on the right horses. Don't assume that your folks have the skills and knowledge required to do good account planning. So in addition to giving them some training on the overall process, we may want to look at providing our salespeople with some skills development as it relates to their ability, for example, to manage a team. A lot of times sales people are put into this role of being an account manager. They're expected to manage a broad team, and not everybody's equipped to do that. So look at how you need to develop your talent. Then lastly, patience and reality. These are account planning processes. The things that you're doing may not bear fruit for 2 or 3 years. So if you're looking for a next quarter hit, it's not going to typically happen through account planning. And second is, and this ties in a little bit with patience, which is you need to have that, make sure you're looking at things from a reality perspective. That let's not kid ourselves. Let's not think that just because we've deployed an account planning process, we're now doing account planning. This takes coaching. It takes the support of your technology infrastructure, and like anything in sales, it's not as easy as we always would like it to be, but the benefits are terrific.
Yeah, Jim, this points out also when you're talking about this, and I'm really thinking about the metrics that drive everything, because if your fundamental objective is to improve your retention of those large customers on subscription agreements, you have different structure, talent, et cetera, related to this, versus if you have all your people focused on, trying to do best practice growth, right, of, your accounts and revenue growth. So, all of these things are going to change based upon what is that primary focus, what is that primary metric that you're trying to impact.
Exactly. Yeah. We could move back a slide. Perfect. There we go. So in speaking of metrics, we're often asked by our clients, Tim, do we really need to do account planning? And again, we're research and driven by data. We did a study recently looking at what separates high-performing salespeople from those middle of the road or poor-performing salespeople. And this was one of the key finds from this study, which is the high-performing salespeople. More than half of the time, they are regularly focusing on account planning versus only 41% of poor performers. So it's obviously a best practice. I think intuitively we all know that, but it's always good to help. It's always helpful to have data that supports that theory.
Yeah. So Jim, a lot of this is a behavior thing. How do we drive that behavior away from account planning being that once a year activity that everybody does it beginning of the year, and then we throw those account plans in the drawer and don't dust them off until next year?
Yeah, it sounds like my account planning process when I was selling. The way that the way that you do that is, I think our observation with our clients, and no surprise here, but the core audience to focus on are the first line managers. You really need to get the first line managers to play that coaching role to ensure that that their salespeople, the folks that they're reporting to them, are doing the account planning. If my sales manager never comes back to my account plan and asks me how I'm progressing vis-a-vis what I had put forth in terms of my plan and my action steps, then I'm probably unless I'm not one of those high performers, I may not hold myself accountable. Certainly, technology is a huge enabler here because, because I'm a 25-year veteran. Back when we did account plans, you did them in binders. You did them in hard copy binders.
You're really dating yourself now.
I know, yeah. We used to have to pick our 3 largest accounts, beginning of the year, stand up there, present. You'd be told what here's what you're not doing. You kind of walk out with your tail between your legs. You grab your 3 binders, throw them up on the shelf, and never look at them again, because it was you can't share a PowerPoint presentation or a binder or a Word document, or you can't share them readily. And so account planning must be built into your SFA, and that not only enables the account team to share information dynamically, and makes that account planning process and that account planning data a living document, but also it enables that manager to play that important coaching role. So as a manager, it's much easier for me to see what you're doing with your account plan. I can check in and see the progress, and that way I can be prepared to have a coaching conversation, either to say, hey, keep up the great work. I see that you're moving forward with this account plan, or, hey, I'm not noticing a lot of progress here. What's the story?
Okay. Well, now you're on one of my favorite topics, account segmentation. So I've got that throwback to the 1970s hit show Kung Fu in my head, choose wisely, grasshopper. So why don't you give us some of your research on segmentation?
Sure. I remember when you can snatch this pebble from my hand, right? That was Kung Fu. So and this is where, because account planning does take a lot of resources, you're not going to do this with all your accounts. It's really important to make sure that you're betting on the right horses. It starts by looking at, and a lot of our clients will look at the customer lifetime value. And customer lifetime value, you look at the typical lifespan, the typical propensity to buy, how often they're buying, the average buying price. And from that, you can begin to calculate, what is the long-term value of this particular client. And that's a good place to start. But that can lead us down the path of just going after those biggest accounts. And we see this time and time again. Just because a particular account is throwing off a lot of revenue, it may or may not mean that they should be one of those accounts that you want to invest account planning on. The other thing you want to look at is things like, and more qualitative, do they buy from us, or do they buy across our the competitive landscape? And what's our relationship like today? And this goes into some of more of the qualitative assessment. So, what is the relationship, the status of the relationship today? How are we viewed by this client? And by doing that, we do suggest that you want to start with that quantitative analysis, and here you can use, and more of our clients are using analytics to help them point in the right direction of where they see opportunity for growth in accounts. So they're using advanced analytics to determine who might be ready for the next big purchase. But in determining where you want to spend those resources, you want to do so by looking at I use a pie analogy because I just happen to like pie, but it's how do I, if the pie isn't growing, isn't getting any bigger, how do I ensure that we get the biggest piece possible? If we can, how do we make this pie bigger? How do we grow our share, not only the share of wallet, but the size of the wallet that account? Or, if we look at, especially larger accounts, are there other pies that we should be cutting into, other buying centers that we are not involved with today that we need to be. And to do that, you want to look at things like spend analysis, opportunity analysis. This is where pipeline analytics is really helpful, and that's why we stress to our clients that strong discipline in pipeline management is vital in terms of understanding opportunity. And then we want to look at things like how much do they spend with us, how much do they spend with our competitors, and then again identifying those buying centers and beginning to look at where we have relationships today, where we don't have relationships today, or where we don't have strong relationships today. But this gives us the quantitative assessment. We also want to look at the qualitative assessment. If we could just build this out. So this is a matrix, a quadrant, if you will, that one of our clients developed, and this is not the end or be all of qualitative analysis as it relates to account planning, but this should give some folks some thought in terms of when I look at not just the size of an account but also the quality of the relationship or other qualitative aspects that I want to consider. This is a pretty good example, because here the client said, hey, on the x-axis, the bottom, I want to look at the growth potential, not just that I'm getting a lot, but there's a lot more to be had, and that's an important distinction. You may be getting a good amount of money from an account, but you may be maxing out in terms of the share of wallet, and you want to be careful in terms of what is my potential actually to grow that, and there your account strategy may be just retaining the business you have. But in the y-axis, this is a client was looking and saying, what's our quality of relationship? How are we perceived? Again, we're looking at this from the buyer's perspective, not our perspective. How are we perceived by this account? Are we considered just another vendor where we get our fair share of the business, but it's always going out to bid, we always have to go through procurement? Or do we have a more strategic relationship where we have that, we've got a lot of non-compete business, and we have relationships at a high level, and we've reached that that mythical trusted advisor status with this account. And then looking at these quadrants, you can then make determinations. So for example, where you've got low revenue growth and you're treated as a vendor, you may say, hey, love this business, want to keep this business, but we're not going to spend a lot of resources in doing account planning. If there's low revenue growth, but we're perceived as a strategic partner, we need to be real careful here, because our salespeople could get lulled into this sense of, well, I've got a great relationship with this account and I want to invest resources. Well, part of the job of a first-line manager is to say, you know what, you're done here. It just doesn't make any sense for us to continue to throw a lot of resources at this account. And again, we might want to look at, really looking at that account more from a maintenance perspective. In the upper right, that's where where we've got that strategic partnership where there's high revenue growth potential. That's where we want to focus our resources, and that typically may be where you start from the account planning process. But then you want to look at that lower right quadrant, because that's where typically there's a lot of growth to be had, and there you want to make that determination. If we have the ability to invest resources and we have the ability to move the relationship, then we should do so. Now, there's some accounts that you work with that no matter what you do with them, you'll never be a strategic partner. Folks, the classic example is Walmart. You can invest a lot of resources with Walmart, but they tend to look at everybody as a vendor. So you want to carefully look at the quality of that relationship today, and then make a determination as to whether or not, hey, we're treating this account as a vendor, and they're treating us as a vendor, but we do have that ability to create that strategic partnership, and it makes sense for us to invest resources to do that.
Yeah, Jim, this is a crucial element, right? Because so often, you look at some of those major names, Walmart, Bank of America, General Electric, those shiny objects, and if you're perceived as non-strategic, but man, they sure look pretty, you really want to invest. That's a hard decision to make. Absolutely,
and again, this is where technology can again help and play a role. It sounds good in theory to talk about how we map accounts. So here's an example from a company called Revigy.
May have heard of us.
And if you would, could you describe, because this brings that quadrant to life.
Yeah, and this is the same thing, Jim, that you're seeing, is that our customers have come to us and said we need to segment using both quantitative and qualitative metrics our accounts. And so we have, within Revigy the capability of whatever your quantitative and qualitative measurements are, to leverage those in a variety of ways to either look at things like, net new opportunity, which account should I focus on, or in this case, this is a little different switch on the last grid that you were just showing us, where we're looking at risk, right? Because we're looking at the strength of our relationship against revenue. And so those accounts in the bottom right are generating a huge amount of revenue for us, but based upon our scorecarding, we've got really weak relationships. So, we need to be concerned about those accounts in the bottom right who potentially, as you know, within any company, 20% of the customers, those biggest customers, can generate 60 to 80% of the revenue. So this quadrant analysis I'm a big fan of, and it just happens to be something in Revigy that we support different ways of doing that.
Again, it's another terrific example of how technology works. It's great, one thing to capture this information, it's another to bring it to life and to make it actionable through the use of technology like this.
All right, so we did our segmentation, right? We chose wisely, we hope, Kung Fu. Now we're going to try and figure out how do we penetrate that. We're going to get our best and brightest minds in a room and try and figure out, okay, what is it this customer's trying to accomplish so we can go out and best help them. So what kind of best practices have you got in this area, Jim?
Sure. This gets back to that, again, always looking at this from the lens of the buyer. So we say the first thing, your first job is to begin to gather account insights, and why that, and we, again, this is one of those things where we would say intuitively that makes sense, but again, we're a research organization and we want to show it with data. So we go out and we don't only talk to salespeople, we talk to buyers. We ask CXOs, and again, and the reason we pick CXOs is a lot of our clients, especially when they look at their account planning process, they're saying we want to get higher up in the organization. We want to elevate that relationship. How do we do it? Well, you can see here we asked CXOs, what do how does the salesperson earn your trust? And you can see it's not by cultivating a relationship. They have enough friends, thank you. It's not that show me how I can be successful. I can show them, I'm a CXO. I think I know I'm successful. More than twice as often, they said, you better come in and walk and demonstrate deep expertise on my company or firm. If that old question, what keeps you up at night? If you ask the CXO what keeps them up at night, they're likely to answer, worrying about wasting time with salespeople like you. You need to walk in the door with a good understanding of not only the business, what it does, how it measures itself, but also some of the issues and challenges, the objectives of that CXO. And then more than 4 times as often they said, hey, when you walk in the door, you need to demonstrate deep expertise in my industry. And Tim, this gets back to what you were talking about earlier, about how do we begin to not just react to buying processes, but how can we create them? A good way to create a good catalyst to creating a buying process is through industry expertise, sharing insights, being provocative, as you pointed out earlier, to show and demonstrate, hey, this is what's happening in your industry, and you're way behind, and you need to, you need to make some changes in order to catch up with your peers.
Jim, that's a great point. I mean, I've always thought that those people they want to know that you've walked a mile in their shoes, but the thing that where CXOs are like account execs and sales reps is they want to know what their competition's doing, right? That's the place where we simple salespeople and account managers are like CXOs. I want to know what my competition's doing, and so do they. Absolutely
right. Yep, and that's especially true when we're talking about those accounts where we're going to be focusing account planning efforts on. We need to have those insights, and that we need to have that competitive, that ability to share with them. Here's how we can help you be more competitive. Last year we ran a similar study with CXOs, and we asked the question, how do you define, value that you get from the relationships you have with sales organizations and vendors? And what came back number one, and not surprisingly, was show me how you create a competitive differentiation for us. And that was higher than help me save money, help me reduce risk. The number one value they were looking for is help me run a more competitive business. The other reason we want to gather insights, though, is we want to make sure, again, especially as we look to elevate our relationships, that we're not just always reacting to functional requirements. And I'll walk you through this value pyramid very quickly, but I'll do it through a story from a client that we worked with recently. And it starts at the bottom, actually. So, the functional requirements, when we're reacting or responding to functional requirements, it typically takes the shape of an RFP that lands at your desk as a salesperson, and you had nothing to do with its creation. It came out of the blue. And, I remember my sales experience, you were kind of happy that you got an RFP because, hey, great, now I've got some pipeline to add. But the reality is, if I don't know who created that RFP, chances are it was one of my competitors, and I'm already behind the
Oh, Jim, you're bursting a lot of bubbles out there, man.
But if we think about that, so this one client, they provide services and technology to help organizations do a better job of cleansing data and also bringing together various databases and bringing together, cleaning up that data so you get a better view. And that basically was what the RFP was asking for. It was a very technical-driven RFP, and it was issued by the folks in IT from this particular company. But the department, if we go up one level, the department that had actually requested the need for this data cleansing was the marketing department, because the marketing department had all these different systems that they were trying to pull customer data on, ERP systems, their CRM systems, their marketing automation platform. They had social, they wanted to collect data from social channels. They wanted to collect data from the call center software. And all these systems didn't work together, and they needed to find a solution to get one view of a customer and the customer's life cycle. The reason that they needed to do that, the critical issues and challenges, was that they were being told to find opportunity to grow in existing accounts. And the marketing people said, I can't get a single view of our existing accounts, so I'm not really sure how much growth is available. The strategic initiative came from the CEO. So now we're up even higher. So the strategic initiative from the CEO was, we need to grow organically. Our industry is not growing. There's not a lot of growth left from a white space perspective. So we're going to have to look to grow within our existing accounts. So the CEO was putting that pressure on the folks in marketing to identify where there was growth potential in accounts. And again, the marketing people were challenged. And the corporate objective, how that all came up to the very top here, was the CEO was getting a lot of pressure from Wall Street because their growth rates had dropped. They were still growing, but they weren't growing at the rate that Wall Street had come accustomed to. And so the CEO, basically said one of our objectives is to grow organically. So you can see here from that corporate objective from the CEO, the impact it had on the folks in marketing to have to go out and consolidate all these various databases. It ends up as an RFP on the desk of a salesperson from IT, and they're so far removed from that basically here they're being treated as a vendor. And it's our job, and this is one of the things we want to do in gathering insights, is to become much smarter in our ability to connect the dots and talk about how our data cleansing solution is going to help you achieve your corporate objectives as well as your departmental initiatives.
So Jim, I see this all the time. Unfortunately, as an account manager, a lot of time we're working with those people who want to make sure that we've got our TPS reports properly stapled. So based on the fact that you and I have walked through this presentation a couple of times, I bet you've got some great ideas on how to find that strategic initiative and corporate objective info.
I sure do, Tim. And it gets into looking at data and what we call data, information, and insights. And I'll walk people through now how we differentiate. Data, we look at data as the basics. This is something that's going to be available to you, but also to your competitors. And it's things like looking at the company's annual report, their 10K, obviously going out to the website and looking at investor relations. But it's also going out and finding out who's talking about this space. Who are the thought leaders? Who are the analysts that cover this space? So you want to use social media as a way of gathering information about how the market is viewing, or the street in Wall Street is viewing this particular account. And then there are tools. Google and Yahoo Finance are two examples of Hoover's is another example, where you can get finance or background information on an account. A great place to start. Surprisingly, well, I don't know. In 25 years, I don't know why it still surprises me, but it does surprise me still how few account managers or even salespeople do an even decent job in gathering data. And I think part of the challenge is understanding what's enough and what's not enough. But specifically when you're talking about account planning, and that expectation that if I want to elevate my relationship, I need to have a pretty good understanding of their business. You need to invest that time in getting this background. And just as a one of the a great data source, if it's a publicly held company, is listening to their earnings report, because you can get some really good insights in regards to what's happening right now with that business. But again, as we said, data is available to you, but it's also available to your clients. So what we want to do is we also want to use the relationships we have within this account. Those might be existing relationships, they may be new relationships. But here the salesperson wants to ask questions, not just around their products or their solutions, but also understanding a little bit more about what's happening in that business. Again, you want to do that built upon the homework that you've done. Folks don't want to do your work for you. But if I say to a client, let's say that we're in the midst of a sales call, and I kind of change direction from being product focused, and I say, hey, if I could, can we just spend a few minutes, just take a step back and just talk about what's happening here at XYZ company? I was listening to the earnings conference call webcast, and your CEO talked about this initiative to grow organically. How's that putting pressure on you? Blah, blah, blah. That's how you gain information. And then insight is that ability to bring it all together and to show, and this gets back to that our ability to provoke a buyer or challenge a buyer into a buying process. It's through that understanding of their business and saying, my understanding is you want to grow organically. One of the challenges you're going to have is you've got all these disparate, databases that don't talk to one another. So let us show you how our solution can help you achieve that objective of growing organically. That's how you put together data and information in order to create insights.
Thanks, Jim. All right, so in the South, we talk about all that stuff is fixing to get ready. And now in the last 20 minutes, we're in the home stretch here where we're going to talk about what are the key best practices in actually doing the planning and execution. So why don't you do some of those, Jim?
I'm fixing to show you how. So the common elements. And so one of the things we do here at Sirius Decisions is we look at all the vendors, training vendors. I shouldn't say all of them because there are thousands of them, but we look at the major training vendors who have account planning methodologies, and there are a lot of good methodologies out there. But as we look at those various vendors, there's common elements that we see in every methodology. So we our counsel to clients basically is, hey, there's not a whole heck of a lot of differentiation in terms of how various training vendors approach account planning. So pick a vendor and then focus on that execution. But the common elements we see across them is, number one, start with the buyer. So start with that account. Do you understand where this account wants to go as a company? What are their objectives and goals? And looking at what is our current relationship? Where do we stand today? Not only in that quantitative aspect, but also that qualitative aspect. How are we perceived? Where do we have relationships? Where don't we have relationships? And what are our goals? What do we expect to accomplish with this account? We then, want to look at mapping and assessing the organizational structure for every buying center and how well we understand that and what the relationship is across those buying centers. And then we begin to look at identifying where we see potential opportunity. So this might only be an opportunity in our mind today, not with the buyer, but we want to begin to identify where there are pockets of opportunity for us to begin to explore expanding our relationship with this account. As we look at goals, one of the important aspects of account planning, as we talked about, one of the important elements is setting goals. And when we set goals, we recommend to our clients that they adhere to the concept of SMART goals, which has been around for years. But the concept of a SMART goal, and this is regardless of what goal you're setting, not just account planning, but you want to make sure that it's specific enough, it's quantitative in its nature, that you can measure it and that it's attainable, and it's also realistic and time bound, and that you've got set. We will expand our relationship and have X number of deals in the pipeline by this date. We will have X number of meetings held with these various individuals in order to move these opportunities forward. Whatever your goals are, you want to make sure that they follow along with the SMART process. And this is probably to us, this is the essence of account planning. And I think it's the one part of account planning that often folks don't spend enough time on. But at the end of the day, you don't sell to an account. You don't sell to an IBM or a GE or a GM. You sell to the people within those accounts. And I know that sounds, trite, but that's the reality. And so our focus needs to be on the conversations we're having and identifying today, where do we have relationships? So here's an example of an organizational or buying center chart from Revigi, and Tim, I'll let you talk a little bit more about this in a second. But here we're able to map out the status of our relationship. Where do we have strong relationships, where they're in green? Where do we have adversaries, which are in red? Those are folks that might be more in favor with our competitors and not us. Where do we have, where are we neutral? Where, they could go with us or they could go with the competitor. And then the gray is, where don't we have relationships? And a big part of our account planning process needs to be around how well we understand this structure, how well we understand this buying map, if you will, and then putting forth an action plan in order to drive the right conversations at the right level in order to then begin to drive those opportunities. Tim, is there anything else you would add as you look at this?
No, you're exactly right. It's really about the outcome or the action planning. Account planning is worthless without the outcomes. All Revigi is really trying to do is bring visual tools to the table so that we don't talk about for, a half of our account planning session about who's who in the zoo and who likes us and who influences who, that instead it becomes obvious at the snap exactly what's going on so we can focus on what do we need to accomplish, who do we need to get to, and how do we block the enemy. Yeah,
and here again, the beauty of the technology is the integration with our CRM system. And I often will see clients try to do this using PowerPoint. They'll try using, I've seen the client use mind mapping software. Looks great, but it's not very productive because salespeople are doing double data entry. It's not connected to our SFA, and you can't share it. And we need to be able to share this with our account team because our sales engineers might have relationships with some of these folks, and we want to leverage that. As an account manager, I'd want to leverage those relationships.
Yeah, I think really the only other thing that I'd add, Jim, is you can't manage what you can't measure, and being able to have it in a tool where you can actually understand the strength and weaknesses of your relationships across lots of accounts helps get some visibility into what we're improving and what we're not improving.
Absolutely. But we started our conversation, Tim, talking about execution, right? So we spent a lot of time talking about segmenting the accounts, getting information, doing that planning, but without execution, why do it? And so one of the things that we'll see with our clients is they'll get into that analysis paralysis where they get so caught up in trying to create the perfect plan that they forget about the execution part. And so what we always counsel our clients is when in doubt, you want to move towards action.
Yeah.
So to do that, and this is again, where technology really can take account planning out of the dark ages, if you will, and make it execution, so that folks are focusing on execution, so we can make it actionable. Is as we're building the account plan and as we talk about our strategy and what we want to accomplish in terms of getting better insights into the account, identifying new buying centers, being able to reach out and connect with those individuals in that organizational and political map that we just saw. You basically build out your action plan again, and again, the power of being able to do this through our CRM system means that it's visible to the team, it's visible to the manager, it's visible to the account manager, and we can begin to look at how well we're progressing against the activities that we and key tasks that we've identified in the account planning process.
Yeah, Jim, so this is where I think it's really important to be able to tie your activities to your SMART objectives and goals that you talked about earlier, because one of my earliest mentors told me not to confuse activity with progress.
That's right, and I think while activity is not a bad place to start, if it's just activity for activity's sake, if it's not moving the account plan forward, we need to question our strategy, or maybe we need to question our ability to execute on that strategy. And that's where we talk about aligning marketing and sales at Sirius Decisions. There's the sales enablement function that we see now becoming an important role in an organization to integrate what needs to happen from a marketing and sales perspective to help salespeople execute. Sometimes the problem is not so much that they don't want to execute, it's they can't. If we say to our salespeople, hey, we've identified these key senior executives that we need you to reach out and we need you to engage with. If we haven't enabled our salespeople to do that, if they're not competent or confident in their ability to have that conversation, they're not going to do it. Or they're going to try to do it, they're going to fail, and they're going to go back to what they know, which is going back to that, the operation at the operations level. So really important, you want to align and identify, have we really prepared our salespeople to execute on the account plans, or do we need to address through enablement efforts gaps in skills, gaps in knowledge, gaps in tools to help our salespeople be successful in their execution of these account plans. And then, let's not forget about marketing. At Sirius Decisions, we are all about aligning marketing and sales. We have an account-based marketing group, which it's fairly new here, but it's growing, very, very fast, which would indicate and certainly tells us that it's an important or an emerging important role in marketing. But don't leave marketing out of your account planning process. Marketing can help in providing background information for the account status. They can help in terms of helping move opportunities forward through pipeline acceleration programs. They can help in providing data and insights and analytics on where to prioritize and how to segment those accounts. And then lastly, providing overarching campaigns and programs to support an account strategy. We are starting to see that with companies that have very large global accounts, that there is a person assigned to that account from a marketing perspective to drive the business in that account.
Jim, this is spot on. I'm a big fan of inviting marketing to be part of the account planning process. One of our largest customers is an enormous global corporation, and frankly, they act like 50 separate companies under one corporate umbrella. And getting marketing to help us penetrate some of those buying centers and business units where we're not already embedded is a huge value in our personal account planning process.
Yeah, and we're, this is some data here that shows how marketing is spending on various tactics when it comes to accounts. So this is less about when you're talking about account-based marketing. It's less about lead generation, and more about relationship building. So it's not surprising you see more money being spent on live events and trade shows and things like that, as opposed to your traditional like direct mail campaigns.
Excellent. All right, and this is our last topic before we start asking people to surprise some questions. So just want to give a reminder to everybody on the phone that there's a little question window there. So if you've got some questions for Jim or for myself, feel free to go ahead and enter some questions, and we're going to answer them as soon as Jim gets through. What I think is one of the more important elements is the measurement, right? How do we know if we've been successful?
Yeah, and again, one of the challenges here is, and we set the stage earlier when we talked about, hey, if you're looking to do this, implement account planning because you need a bump next quarter, you're doing it for the wrong reason. So you do need to start looking at and considering the longer term, if you will, measurement elements. And that's sometimes hard for sales because we do live in that quarter-to-quarter world. But with accounts, you really need to start to look at that long term. So what we recommend to our clients is you do want to measure near-term metrics, and to your point, Tim, you want to look at what progress are we making against the activities that we had identified through our account planning process. So are we able to expand that? Are we able to turn more of those boxes in our political map from gray to green and from yellow to green? And are we able to create new political maps because we've identified new buying centers? Are we doing regular account reviews? Are we doing the right things? And then from an activity perspective, are we able to see, are we getting to the right levels? Are we beginning to expand our relationship? If we looked at that political map, are we able to even get to the people that we had identified we need to get to? And then from that, the midterm metrics is where we're seeing the progress. So are we seeing an increase in pipeline? Are we beginning to see an improvement to our renewal rates, as they especially relate to those larger accounts? Are we beginning to see that we are displacing the competition more rather than less? And, do we see our ability to expand our relationship instead of doing one-off, for example, one-off user licenses, we're doing corporate deals now. And then lastly, the long-term metrics. And this is where we're really looking at those 2 to 3 year out results. And this is where the ultimate measurement of our account planning happens. But are we able to do those things that we set forth as our goals? Are we able to, have we been able to grow our retention rate? Are we able to expand the growth in a particular account? Are we able to grow our business in a particular sector? Have we been able to perhaps accelerate the sales cycle because we've reached that stage where we have that strategic partnership, where we're not always having to go out to bid? Do we have high loyalty scores? Is this a client that would recommend us, and is in our reference program? And then lastly, do we see, are we beginning to see a bump in regards to other companies who are beginning to take interest in our organization because of the strength of our brand based on the great work that we're doing with these accounts?
Jim, I think these are all, crucial metrics. One of the things that comes back to my mind is your earlier conversation is, be patient, because I know for a fact that in account planning, pipeline is probably one of the fastest metrics that you can impact. Find new business units to penetrate, cross-sell, upsell, those kind of things. But if you're talking about loyalty like Net Promoter Scores or actual revenue recognition, that could be 9, 12, 18 months before you start to get those metrics impacted. All right,
exactly.
So folks, we're now at the end. We're going to open it up to some questions. The first question that we've got is, Jim, so if I'm a global account manager where I've got 1 or 2 or 3 accounts that I'm managing, how does that differ from if I'm a territory account manager where I may have 30 to 40 accounts? How does this whole process and planning process differ for those 2 worlds?
So if you're managing a global account, chances are you'll be working with people in other countries. That's number one. That's how it differs. No.
Thanks.
You'll need to learn how to account plan in many different languages. No, the first, and we have a number of clients where, a global account manager will have one account. I mean, they're essentially running a small, or in some cases, a mid-sized business because of the business coming off that global account. So one of the things that differs, we talked about the talent and the skills required to be that global account manager are going to differ greatly from than being a successful territory rep. And part of that would be the level and detail of account planning you're doing. So if I'm managing a global account, the complexity obviously is much greater. The level of detail that I'll want to perform is going to be much greater. The time I'll spend on that account planning will also be greater. So the level of detail you'll go into will be much bigger.
Okay.
If I'm managing 30 territory accounts, I probably only do account planning, detailed account planning, maybe my top 10. And the level of data I'll be capturing and the amount of time I'll spend on account planning will obviously be a lot less than what I would be doing if I was that global account manager.
Okay. There's one last question that we've got, Jim, and then we'll spin you through. Do you see any differences between the people who are doing, account planning in, the United States and North America versus account planning being conducted elsewhere in the world, for Asia Pac and EMEA and Latin America?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is, and this we were talking about, when we talked about the long-term view. It's actually what I find is that when I'm working with strategic account managers or global account managers who are working outside the U.S., they tend to take a longer-term view, and I don't know if that's a result of our our kind of the short-term way of working here in the States, but they do tend to have that longer-term view in their account planning process, and obviously also looking at building the relationships and how you build those relationships differs, depending on what country you're in. So the strategies might differ slightly based on, in the States you may look at going full bore at expanding your relationship with a senior executive, and look to do that, accelerate that. If I'm in Asia Pac, I may be less. I might look to do so, but using my existing relationships, and again taking a longer term perspective. So I may not I may not reach out to that senior executive. I might work with my existing contacts to earn the right to then be introduced to that senior executive. So there's just two things. So it's how business is done will dictate the difference in how they account plan, and relationship building being a key one. And the second is again that they have that longer term view, or it seems that there's that longer term view is not as it's much more accepted, and as opposed to the U.S. where again we have to really push people to start thinking about looking at 2 to 3 years out. I don't know if do you see anything different?
No, I noticed that. I see a lot of, and when I'm dealing with folks in Latin America and Europe and Asia, they talk a lot more about the relationship and building a long-term relationship, where I do have a tendency to see more people focused on, what are we going to get next quarter. So I agree with your perspective. All right, Jim, well, we've reached the top of the hour. I'd like to thank everybody who participated in our webinar. We'll be posting a replay on our website, and you've got Jim and my email address here on the screen. I'd like to thank Jim Ninavaji from Sirius Decisions for participating and leading this particular presentation. Thanks, Jim. Great job.
Thanks, Tim. It was my pleasure. And thanks for the opportunity to present with Revigi.
All right. We'll do it again here soon. And thanks. Everybody have a great day.